Hello, and thank you for joining me for the fifth data analysis bootcamp class. Today we're going to discuss bivariate analysis, and we'll get really deep into correlation and interpreting that correlation. Before we get started, let's talk about and review the mnemonics from last class. Okay, so in our last class, the first thing we discussed was the bar plot, which is really great for highlighting summary statistics, most often comparing the summary statistic, an average or a median from each one of the features in our data set. And it really allows us to see which one's higher very easily, which one's lower very easily. Like our candles on the cake here, we can very quickly see which is the highest and which is the shortest. A cool thing about Seaborn is that we can also use matplotlib to extract the bars and highlight different things like the edges on the bars using the patches attribute. We also discussed the line plot, which is very simple, kind of a classical plot, and it really allows us to understand trends and movements over time. And because of its simplicity, it is really great for comparing different features, different classes over time in a category. Okay. We also discussed the histogram plot, which allows us to essentially control how much noise we're moving in. With the bins argument, we can either make them larger or skinnier and control how much noise we are removing from our distribution, the shape of our distribution. This is almost like simulating the fact that, or if we were to have a larger sample and remove that noise that we get from taking a smaller sample. We also discussed the KDEplot, which really allows us to plot the outline of a distribution. It is very simple in that sense, kind of like a smoothing or a rolling average of the outline of the distribution. It can be valuable to turn up, increase or decrease the amount of smoothing happening so that we get some detail of where we're actually seeing the data in our distribution. And we also discussed the box plot, and like I've mentioned already many times already, it is very great for highlighting the outliers in our data set. It generalizes the whole distribution in favor of focusing on the outliers. And the cool thing about Seaborn is we can control the whiskers, how long or how short the whiskers are in our box plot, and really focus on which outliers we wanted to discuss or we wanted to talk about, wanted to focus on. And this is especially valuable when you're doing a presentation and would prefer to focus on a certain range of outliers. Okay. We also discussed the violin plot, which is the KDE plot on either side and mirror image so that we can, it's meant to allow for the human eye to notice symmetry better. It's supposed to be a little bit easier to see the mirror image to the KDE plot versus just the KDE plot by itself. I don't know if I specifically noticed that overly, but what I do notice is that our eyes are good at noticing symmetry and when things are not symmetrical. So cool thing about this, using the split equals true argument, we can plot two different categories next to each other and how the distributions are affected by those categories. This allows us to really notice those subtle details because again, our eyes are geared towards noticing things that are symmetrical or not symmetrical. We also discussed the boxenplot, which is a hybrid of the box plot and the histogram plot. This really allows us to visualize the distributions that lead into, understand the tails that lead into the outliers. It gives a better sense of where we should really be classifying outliers as they are. So this is really my preferred version over the box plot, the kind of modern day box plot, the boxenplot. We talked about the swarm plot, which allows us to see really so much detail. Unlike all the other plots that we've discussed up until now, they generalize in some way, which is generally very helpful when we're analyzing. Sometimes we want to see a lot of information, and so the swarm plot allows us to get that really fine level detail and really see things that would otherwise be unseen. Okay, we discussed the Countplot, which allows us to understand the balances between our different classes and see if there is an imbalance in favor of one class or the other and make comparisons of those frequencies. Lastly, we discussed the displot and the catplot. Those are figure level plots in Seaborn that allow us to subsection our data by different categories on the rows and the columns. The displot allows us then to inspect how the subcategory or subcategory affects the distribution, or how the distributions are different by many categories, and really gives you a really fine detail understanding of the distribution. Catplot is much the same, but we can now subsection our data by the categories, and then inspect how the final, that group of categories is, or another features categories are affected by that. Okay, so let's get started on our bivariate bootcamp class.